My biggest issue in social situations is knowing when to start speaking and also committing to my idea. It feels like every single time I'm in a group of people and I get an idea and I want to share with everyone and I start to speak, it's 50-50 the wrong time. And even when it is the right time, as soon as I start to draw attention to myself, I start to just kind of peter it out. And this has led to a bit of an obsession around committing to an idea, learning how to introduce an idea in my voice in any situation possible. Welcome to the Communicate with Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Lilith Rose, and that is indeed what we're talking about today. We're talking about introducing your idea, your voice, your story, any kind of start to speech in your professional Welcome to the Communicate with Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Lilith Rose, and that is indeed what we're talking about today. I have learned so much about introducing a topic on stage in my 10-ish years of being a public speaker, but that was very easy in comparison to taking what I've learned and taking that to the professional level and also the more casual personal level as well. And that's what we're going to go over today, those three parts. First, when we're talking about the stage level, the public speaking level, I like starting off with this. If you listen to my podcast at all, I usually start with this one because it is the most easy to understand. It is the most cut and dry. You have your formula and you stick with it because you're in charge. No one else is talking to you. So it's very easy to develop the formula, stick to it, and do it because no one's going to interrupt you, hopefully. So once we learn that formula and we get that down and we feel confident in how to introduce ourselves, then we can start bringing it into discussions where we have less and less control over the situation and we can introduce our voice and idea in that situation. And this matters because I often feel like I can just shut up and I can just be there and no one will really care. But number one, that does a disservice to me because I'm not participating in social time, which is very important. And also, I'm doing a disservice to other people who might enjoy a story that I have to share or an idea that I have to share. And, I should do my part and I can do my part in these different social situations. So, starting with the stage. The first thing we got to do is talk about our hook. How are we actually grabbing people's attention? And this is going to play a huge part in every single place. So, how do we grab people's attention? The easiest way is by simply audience interaction. You can say, think about a time when, you can say, raise your hands if, you can say, clap once, if you can hear me. Any kind of audience interaction works because what it's doing is, first of all, centering everyone's attention on you. And number two, the added benefit is that people are already doing something. So when you ask them to do something later, or you ask them for their attention later, they're going to be more likely to actually do that and give you that. If you want more information about how that works, there's a very interesting documentary movie thing on Netflix called Push. I believe it's still on Netflix. I don't know. Everything's leaving it these days. I can't vouch for the science in that, but it is a very interesting exploration into what people will do if people will do what you tell them to do. So any kind of audience interaction is great. For almost all of my speeches, I have people raise their hand at the beginning. I say, raise your hand if. Easy, cut and dry. Yes, a lot of people do it. A lot of people do it though because it works, and no one really cares if everyone does it. Maybe if you're speaking along with a lot of other speakers and everyone's doing that, then maybe that's not going to be as effective. The second easiest way is to simply tell a story. Tell a story from your own life, your own experiences. Definitely going to be the best. Second best is telling an experience that closely relates to you and your audience. The reason why this is easy because everyone loves stories. Everyone loves hearing stories. And also, simply because it's easy for you to memorize what you're going to say because you know your own story. If I tell you to tell me about this time in your life, you did X, Y, or Z, you're able to tell me. You don't have to think about facts or figures or numbers or memorize sentences. The third is a question. This also goes kind of hand in hand with audience participation because you're technically asking them a question and giving audience participation. But it's simple. Ask them a question. The fourth way is to tell a joke. Now, this can be stressful or difficult if you are not like a natural comedian or you don't know a lot about comedy. Then I would stay away from this because if it's not funny and it really flat on its face, then that's just going to be really bad for you. It's not going to bode well for you. So I would advise really not doing a joke unless you feel very confident about your comedy prowess. And the fifth way, and I leave this for last because it can be, it's hit or miss depending on the audience, is you tell a shocking fact. This works really well when you're talking about very serious subjects. When I used to give talks to parents about teen depression, I would say, do you know that 1 in 4 of your kids are clinically depressed? If you have 4 kids, one of them statistically is clinically depressed. And that worked great because it got the parents' attention and showed them that we're not going to just talk about kids being sad or kids being, mistreated because, I don't mistreat my kid. We are talking about something that can affect anyone and it can affect you. So that worked really well for that kind of audience, for that kind of talk. Bonus points. Do you know what hook I gave for this podcast? So, second, once you hook their attention, you want to introduce the topic. Again, you can listen to the beginning of this podcast. I followed all of these steps. It's a little different because it's like podcast and there's like an intro and blah, 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 blah. But you introduce your topic. What are we talking about today? Let's center it. Let's get to the point. Why are we here? And then following up with why are we here, we're talking about our significance. Why does this matter to you? Why should you care? Once we have that, when we're on stage, we also go through our credibility statement of why you should listen to me. And then we preview our points. What are we going to talk about? Here's the roadmap. Here's how the talk is going to go. Now you can follow along and you know exactly where we are. So those are the traditional set and point parts of an introduction of a speech, of a proper speech. That's mostly, not really what we're going to be talking about today. So I tried to go through that as fast as I could without giving too much info. I could talk about intros for a speech for hours and hours. But moving on. So now that we have the formula. So let's apply that formula to a more social situation. Let's look at our professional life. The reason I break up professional and personal, by the way, for any new listeners, is simply because we're a little more formal in our professional lives. We're a little more held back in what we can say. We're a little more, tied to what we're trying to do and what we're trying to say. And we're presenting ideas and projects and like designs and, all that kind of stuff. We're pitching things. And so it is different. And the strategies are going to be different versus just a casual conversation, you're hanging out with people. The first thing, when it comes to the professional introduction, the hook I have found best works as a question slash topic combo. Jokes work really well in addition, but they can be hit or miss. They cannot hit everyone. You can, like, jokes are just a little more up in the air, and if you don't and if you plan it out, then it seems a little too forced. And if you don't plan it out, then it has the wild capacity to just go wrong. So I really recommend starting off with a question and then throwing in the topic. For example, you could say, have you all heard about the new policy that's affecting our homeowners that we serve? No? Okay, so that's why. So I wanted to just quickly talk to you about what about this new product. And we're talking about how that can help the people that we serve. That's one example of like maybe more of a boardroom. You could even be more casual if you're stepping in your boss's office and you say, "Hey, did you hear about that new law that's affecting homeowners?" It's like you can get a yes or a no. If you get a yes, you go, "Awesome! I have an answer, a product that we can actually use to help out these people." Or if they say no, you say, "Okay, so it's this law, the blah 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 blah." So you just explain, that question. You go into the topic, and then you say, "Okay, I have a thing that can really help our homeowners." And then so you have a significance, like a question, significance, and topic all tied in there. When it comes to social situations, you can muddy up the order a bit, except for really the hook. Like the hook exists to grab people's attention. If the topic itself is shocking, if it is interesting on its own and it acts as a hook on its own, then great. Just like introduce the topic. But usually you're gonna want to throw in a question, maybe a story, and you're saying like, "Hey, I was walking over the other day and like this thing happened that made me really think about my position here and I want a raise." Something like that. Uh, Going for credibility in professional situations is important, but usually if your credibility is either pre-established, either through just working with people and them already knowing who you are, or you need to throw in just a tidbit saying, "Remember, like I worked on this and I had that experience and I had this client a few years ago and that's why I know what I'm talking about." Throwing in that significance, throwing in that credibility can be very helpful, but it's really not as important because you're probably not talking to brand new people unless you're giving a full on speech to a brand new set of people. And in that case, you're using the speech outline because this isn't just a conversation. This is an actual speech. Much different than a conversation. And instead of a full preview of what you're going to talk about, you can just give a tiny little summary of saying, "We have this new product. I have this idea for this new product I want to handle. And I think it will really help people by, helping them navigate this law through like a clear, through a clear like steps that they can go through." Something like that. I don't know. I didn't plan that. I just made that up, which I think is obvious. So finally, when we're coming to the personal introduction, this is the most up in the air, I would say. The main thing I have discovered through studying people who do this well, and also my own failings, like mine and other people's failings in trying to introduce topics, the main aspect of success or failure is strength and commitment in your hook, the first words you say. But that commitment has to carry out through the next sentence. And what I've found is that once you get like 3 sentences in and you maintain that strength and commitment, then you're golden. You're good. It really depends on what you're talking about. But for example, if we're in a conversation and someone says, yeah, I hate white water rafting, and I go, oh, really? You remember when I was gone last month when I was traveling? We actually did whitewater rafting, and it was the most fun thing. And then boom, story kicks in. Once you had a question, you had the topic, and then you gave a little summary, because significance isn't that important, and credibility isn't too important when you're telling these stories. Usually credibility comes in if you're sharing something and people are kind of like, I don't know if that's true or not, and you're saying like, oh yeah, they did this experiment, and you gotta cite your sources. If you give it, if you go with enough strength and commitment, no one will question you, but they might silently question you, and they probably will. And so, citing your sources is a great thing. But see, that's why like asking a question is such an innocuous way to start with strength, because if you no one's going to be upset with you for starting off with a question. If you interrupted and said, "Oh, I went whitewater rafting last week. It was so much fun." It's a little bit more bulldozy than saying, "Oh, like I remember when I was gone last month. Or remember that vacation I took. Yeah, we actually went up to the mountains and we actually did this. It was super fun. And I went down this one hill." And then and then you have like the little story. Then the story outline comes in, which I've talked about so much before. I will talk about again, because how to tell stories is something that I find very, very interesting. And you can put a formula to it, and if you know that formula, you can easily tell stories. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if I find it, then I'll put it in the show notes. So that's the aspect when it comes to personal introductions. Strength, commitment, 3 sentences. That's it. And sometimes, especially when I'm at like a party and I'm a little tired and I don't have like all of the social energy that I might, usually save up and, get ready for, a big party, then I will either, if something recently happened that I'm like, oh, this would be so cool, like to talk about, I can't wait to like tell people about this, then I will mentally just like go through the introduction, like the first 3 sentences. Or if people are talking and I realize, oh, I have this idea, or I have this story to share, then I will just mentally go, how am I starting off? What's the first sentence? What's the first sentence I'm saying? Because I know myself well enough and I have practiced well enough to now know all I need is the first sentence. Once I commit to that, I'm golden. But it might help you if this is something you're having trouble with, is to in that moment go, okay, what's a question I can ask? I know what I'm going to say for the topic, so that's done. So second sentence, easy. Third sentence, how am I leading into this story or this idea? Does it need significance? Are they gonna like doubt my credibility? Like, where did I hear that from? And it doesn't have to be a huge cycle, because if you take too long, I mean, you're just gonna run out. You're gonna run out of time, and they're gonna move on to something else. But if you can spend 15 seconds thinking through those first 3 sentences, and then once there's a pause in the conversation, you can say, oh, and then you know exactly what you're saying. You're going throughout your first 3 sentences. You're starting off the story, and now you're in it. And then once you're in it, you're in it. And I have found once I have passed that mark, then there's no problem, because people are paying attention, they're like laughing or they're responding. And once that response is there, then I can riff off of their energy. And that's just the way my body and mind works. yours might work differently, and that's fine. You might need some more sentences. You might need like a little bit more planning about like where you're going. You might want to just practice telling stories. That was one of the reasons I started a podcast, so I could practice speaking. And I use my speech outline on all of my podcast episodes. Say for the Movement Mondays that I've been doing, those, I mean, I know the topics well enough to where I'm like, hey, it's short and quick, and I can just know the topic and any kind of, points that I need to make sure I hit, or sources or anything like that. And as long as I have those notes, I'm good to go. So, and also like we'll go through the ending next episode, so don't worry about that. Next week we'll have the episode on endings. But when it comes to that personal point, I would see if you can identify where your storytelling, where your sharing your speech goes wrong. Where do you start losing steam? Where do you start faltering? When do you start like trailing off and just going, yeah, so that was it, and then kind of like moving on? Or do you not get the point in the first? Do you not get to you sharing in the first place because you don't know where to jump into the conversation? And those are all different issues and things that we can work on and I can talk about. If there's anything in particular, please send me an email. It's cwcpod@gmail.com. And yeah, I can see if maybe I can make an entire episode, or I can just answer your question. I would absolutely love that. Always the best way to actually reach me is if you literally just DM me on Instagram at @LilithRose. And that's honestly the fastest way I usually get back to people. So that's the episode. We talked about giving your introduction on stage with your hook, your topic, your significance, your credibility, and your preview of what you're going to talk about. We talked about the professional introduction where you're combining like a question and topic combo, maybe throwing in some credibility or significance in there, and then giving like a smaller summary to preview what you're going to say. And then, of course, we talked about the personal, casual intro. It's sticking to your guns, being strong, committing to the first few sentences or more, if that's what you need, and planning it out a little bit beforehand, either before the entire interaction or in that moment, giving yourself 10 seconds, 15 seconds to just think about what you want to say first. And that's it. Next week, we're going to talk about endings. But this week, and I'm going to be doing this with you, let's start something with strength this week.